Hey, Sunshine, how are you? Hey, Jasmine, welcome in. Good evening, Sam. How are you? Tired? Yeah, I know that feeling. I was outside working in the yard today with my daughter. Taught her how to use the weed whacker. Or string trimmer. Weed whacker is apparently a brand name. It's like Kleenex. Yeah, I'm doing all right, sir. I am doing all right. As I often say, I am upright and mobile. Semi-mobile, considering my legs are killing me from being in the yard all day. But beggars can't be choosers. Like I said, I got to do the dad thing and teach my oldest daughter how to use a string trimmer. So gave her a healthy fear of that string. It looks like thick fishing line, but it'll cut you real quick. Hey, Marcy, welcome in. How are you? Now, if anybody wonders where I get my sense of humor from, I was at my mom and dad's tonight, and my mom had just had surgery last Thursday, and I hadn't really had a chance to talk to her since before she went in. And hey, Linda, how are you? Good evening, KC. Welcome in. I hadn't had a chance to talk to my mom since she had surgery. So, of course, I asked her, hey, Mom, how was surgery? And she's like, I have no idea. I was asleep the whole time. I'm like, really, Mom? Really? Hey, Queen. Hey, Michelle. How are you? My mom for you. I mean, yeah, I can't complain there, but you know. Good evening, Tina. How are you? I can't complain too much. I am alive and kicking, though I can't kick very high. My grandfather used to say, you know, as long as the grass is under my feet, not 6 feet over my head, I'm not doing too bad. And, you know, I mean, joke's on us. He's in an urn on my shelf, so he's still above ground. Come to think of it, he might be the one I get my sense of humor from, too. Alright, so I am aiming to have a better night than I had last night. We'll see how that goes. From a purely numbers standpoint, it was pretty bad. One of the analytics that TikTok gives you when you're doing live stories like this is it's called the live recommendation percentage, and that's basically how many of your total views, how many of those viewers come from the For You page. My normal range is between 80 and 90%, which is great because I tend to retain people who come in randomly. They just hear the dulcet tones of my voice and they want to stay. Hey Eddie, how are you, brother? But this month, my recommendation percentages have been in the low mid 70s, which is awful. And last night was 60%. Like, my lives have grown every month this year. This will be the first month where it'll be worse. It'll actually, my numbers will actually be worse, which is disheartening. Oh, Smokey Joe, I appreciate whenever anyone is here, whatever time. There's nothing anybody can really do about it. It's just the way their algorithm is. It's unpredictable. And apparently there was a change made earlier this month that's been causing a lot of ruckus within the creator community. So, we shall see. Well, Smokey Joe, if you're looking for replays of my lives, they are over on my Tubes U channel. Same username, UndeadPapa. Those automatically get archived over there, and they are reposted. So, you are welcome to listen to those anytime you like. Yeah, there's something weird going on. I think somebody confirmed that there was a change made to the algorithm that's been causing a lot of issues. Tina, I would rather you listen wherever you enjoy listening. If you enjoy listening here, cool. If you enjoy listening over there, cool. I am not going to abandon TikTok. Up until this month, TikTok has been a very good thing for me. In terms of growth and gaining an audience, and this is where pretty much all my people have found me, which is great. But there are reasons people like the tubes better than they like here. It's more consistent, like, I know people that will literally put me on their TV, which is kind of wild. Like, why would you want to put my face on your TV? But that's besides the point. But yeah, no, wherever you feel comfortable. I'm not abandoning TikTok anytime soon. It'll always be there, but I might be putting my effort into the other site a little bit more. But we'll see if TikTok decides to get its poopy together. You never know. Yeah, Rita, it's honestly, regardless, it's good to be diverse. Because in this day and age, with sites like disappearing out of nowhere, I mean, we all know at the beginning of this year we could have lost TikTok altogether. So, but we did not, which is fortunate because grown a lot on this platform. So we'll see. All right, well, it is 9:11 p.m. here on the East Coast of the U.S. of A. If there was required, I've been able to do it for quite a while, but if there was additional information required, I probably did. So, or they may have changed the rules and I got grandfathered in. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, there's some things I posted over there of like 4-5 hours, but these are 2 hours each. So not too bad. Well, hey, Paula, in the UK, it is getting late there. My youngest daughter lives in Liverpool, and yeah, so well, I am glad you're here. Okie dokie. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Storytime with UndeadPapa. Last night we returned to number 32, Windsor Gardens, to marmalade, mishaps, and the sort of adventures that seem to find one particular bear, wherever he goes. Tonight we pick up where we left off, and spend a little more time with the Browns, with Mr. Gruber, and of course, with Paddington. Thank you, Smokey Joe, I appreciate that. Because with Paddington, even the simplest day has a way of becoming something worth remembering. So wherever you're listening from, dim the lights, sit back, and relax, because story time is about to begin. This is the conclusion of More About Paddington by Michael Bond. Well, Smokey Joe, you have made it that I am only 2 subscribers away from 300. So if anybody else hasn't subscribed over there and wants to kill those other 2 slots and get me up to 300 subscribers, that would be awesome. Hey, Heidi, how are you? Alrighty then. And if you are here and listening over on the tubes, I truly appreciate you. Call 104. And where are you located, Heidi? Hey, Peggy, welcome in. Good to see you. Cleburne, Texas, yeah. And I assume everybody tries to justify with, oh, it's not that bad, it's dry heat. Yeah. 104 is 104. I don't care if it's dry or wet or what. That's why I live in Western New York. It almost never gets that hot. Alrighty then. Chapter 4. Paddington and the Bonfire. Oh, God, the bonfire. That can't possibly be a good idea. Soon after the Marrow adventure, the weather changed. It began to get colder. The leaves fell from the trees, and it became dark very early in the evenings. Jonathan and Judy went back to school, and Paddington was left on his own for much of the day. But one morning, towards the end of October, a letter arrived with his name on the envelope. It was marked urgent and strictly personal, and it was in Jonathan's writing. Paddington didn't get many letters. Only an occasional picture postcard from his Aunt Lucy in Peru, so it was all the more exciting. In some ways, it was a rather mysterious letter, and Paddington couldn't make head or tail of it. In it, Jonathan asked him to collect all the dry leaves he could find and sweep them into a pile ready for when he came home in a few days' time. Paddington puzzled about it for a long time, and in the end he decided to consult his friend Mr. Gruber on the subject. Mr. Gruber knew about most things, and even if he couldn't tell the answer to a question right away, he had a huge library of books in his antique shop and knew just where to look. He and Paddington often had a long chat about things in general over their morning cocoa, and Mr. Gruber liked nothing better than to help Paddington with his problems. "A problem shared is a problem halved, Mr. Brown," he was fond of saying, And I must say that since you came to live in the district, I've never been short of things to look up." As soon as he had finished his breakfast, Paddington put on his scarf and duffel coat, collected the morning shopping list from Mrs. Bird, and set off with his basket on wheels towards the shops on the Portobello Road. Paddington enjoyed shopping. He was a popular bear with the street traders in the market, even though he usually struck a hard bargain. He always compared the prices in various stalls very carefully before actually buying anything. Mrs. Bird said he made the housekeeping money go twice as far as anyone else. It was even colder outside than Paddington had expected, and when he stopped to look in a newsagent's on the way, his breath made the bottom of the window quite cloudy. Paddington was a polite bear, and when he saw the shopkeeper glaring at him through the window, he carefully rubbed the steamy part with his paw in case anyone else wanted to look in. As he did so, he suddenly noticed that the inside of the window had changed since he last passed that way. Before it had been full of chocolate and sweets. Now they were all gone, and in their place was a very ragged-looking dummy sitting on top of a pile of logs. It held a notice in its hand which said, "Remember, remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plot." And underneath that was an even larger notice, saying, "Get your fireworks here." Paddington studied it all carefully for a few moments and then hurried on to Mr. Gruber's, pausing only to pick up his morning supply of buns at the bakery, where he had a standing order. Now that the cold weather had set in, Mr. Gruber no longer sat on the pavement in front of his shop. In the morning, instead, he had arranged a sofa by the stove in the back of the shop. It was a cozy corner, surrounded by books, but Paddington didn't like it quite as much as being outside. For one thing, the sofa was an old one, and some of the horsehairs poked through. But he quickly forgot about this as he handed Mr. Gruber his share of the buns and began telling him of the morning's happenings. "Gunpowder, treason, and plot," he said Mr. Gruber, as he handed Paddington a large mug of steaming cocoa. "Why, that's to do with Guy Fawkes Day." He smiled apologetically and rubbed the steam from his glasses when he saw that Paddington still looked puzzled. "I just forget, Mr. Brown, that," he said, "that you came from darkest Peru. I don't suppose you know about Guy Fawkes." Paddington wiped the cocoa from his whiskers with the back of his paw in case it left a stain, and shook his head. "Well," continued Mr. Gruber, "I expect you've seen fireworks before. I seem to remember when I was in South America many years ago, they always had them on fete days." Paddington nodded. Now that Mr. Gruber mentioned it, he did remember his Aunt Lucy taking him to a fireworks display. Although he had only been very small at the time, he had enjoyed it very much. "We only have fireworks once a year," said Mr. Gruber, "on November the 5th. And then he went on to tell Paddington all about the plot to blow up the Houses of Parliament many years ago, and how its discovery at the last moment had been celebrated ever since by burning of bonfires and letting off of fireworks. Mr. Gruber was very good at explaining things, and Paddington thanked him when he had finished. Mr. Gruber sighed, and a faraway look came into his eyes. "It's a long time since I had any fireworks of my own, Mr. Brown," he said. "A very long time indeed." "Well, Mr. Gruber," said Paddington importantly, "I think we're going to have a display. You must come to ours." Mr. Gruber looked so pleased at being invited that Paddington hurried off at once to finish his shopping. He was anxious to get back to the newsagent's quickly so that he could investigate the fireworks display. When he entered the shop, entered the shop, the man looked at him doubtfully over the top of the counter. "Fireworks?" he said. "I am not sure I'm supposed to serve young bears with fireworks." Paddington gave him a hard stare. "In darkest Peru," he said, remembering all that Mr. Gruber had told him, "we had fireworks every fete day." "I dare say," said the man, "but this isn't darkest Peru, nor anything like it. What do you want, bangers or the other sort?" "I think I'd like to try some you can hold in the paw for a start," said Paddington. The man hesitated. "All right," he said. "I'll let you have a packet of the best sparklers. But if you singe your whiskers, don't come running to me grumbling and wanting your money back." Paddington promised he would be careful, and was soon hurrying back up the road towards the Browns' house. As he rounded the last corner, he bumped into a small boy wheeling a pram. The boy held out a cap containing several coppers and touched his hat respectively. "Penny for the guy, sir." "Thank you very much," said Paddington, taking a penny out of the cap. "It's very kind of you." "Oi!" said the boy as Paddington turned to go. "Oi! You're supposed to give me a penny, not take one yourself." Paddington stared at him. "Give you a penny?" he said, hardly able to believe his ears. "What for?" "For the guy, of course," said the boy. "That's what I said. A penny for the guy." He pointed to the pram, and Paddington noticed for the first time that there was a figure inside it. It was dressed in an old suit, wearing a mask. It looked just like the one he'd seen in the shop window earlier that morning. Paddington was so surprised that he had undone his suitcase and placed a penny in the boy's hat before he really knew what was going on. "If you don't like giving a penny for the guy," said the small boy as he turned to go, "why don't you get one of your own? All you need is an old suit and a bit of straw." Paddington was very thoughtful as he made his way home. He even almost forgot to ask for a second helping at lunch. "I do hope he hasn't hit another of his ideas," said Mrs. Brown, as Paddington asked to be excused and disappeared into the garden. "It's most unlike him to have to be reminded about things like that, especially when it's stew. He's usually so fond of dumplings." "I suspect it's an idea," said Mrs. Bird ominously. "I know the signs." "Well, I expect the fresh air will do him good," said Mrs. Brown, looking out of the window. "And it's very good of him to offer to sweep up all the leaves. The garden's in such a mess." "It's November," said Mrs. Bird. "Guy Fawkes." "Oh," said Mrs. Brown. "Oh, dear." For the next hour, Paddington enjoyed himself in the garden with Mrs. Bird's dustpan and brush. The Browns had a number of trees, and very soon he had a large pile of leaves, almost twice his own height, in the middle of the cabbage patch. It was while he was sitting down for a rest in the middle of the flower bed that he felt someone watching him. He looked up to see Mr. Curry, the Browns' next-door neighbor, eyeing him suspiciously over the fence. Mr. Curry wasn't very fond of bears, and he was always trying to catch Paddington doing something he shouldn't so that he could report him. He had a reputation in the neighborhood for being mean and disagreeable, and the Browns had as little to do with him as possible. "What are you doing, Bear?" he growled at Paddington. "I hope you're not thinking of setting light to all those leaves." "Oh, no," said Paddington. "It's for Guy Fawkes." "Fireworks," said Mr. Curry grumpily. Nasty things banging away and frightening people. Paddington, who had been toying with the idea of trying out one of his sparklers, hastily hid the packet behind his back. "Aren't you having any fireworks, then, Mr. Curry?" he asked politely. "Fireworks?" Mr. Curry looked at Paddington with distaste. "Me? I can't afford them, Bear. Waste of money. What's more, if I get any coming over my garden, I shall report the whole matter to the police." Paddington felt very glad he hadn't tested his sparkler. "Mind you, Bear," a sly gleam came into Mr. Curry's eye, and he looked round carefully to make sure no one else was listening. "If anyone likes to invite me to their fireworks display, that's a different matter." He signaled Paddington over to the fence and began whispering in his ear. As Paddington listened, his face got longer and longer, and his whiskers began to sag. "I think it's disgraceful," said Mrs. Bird later on that day when she heard that Mr. Curry had invited himself to the firework party. "Frightening a young bear like that with talk of police and such like. Just because he's too mean to buy his own fireworks. It's a good job he didn't say it to me. I'd have told him a thing or two." "Poor Paddington," said Mrs. Brown. "He looked most upset. Where is he now?" "I don't know," said Mrs. Bird. "He's gone off somewhere looking for some straw. I expect it's to do with his bonfire." She returned to the subject of Mr. Curry. "When I think of all the errands that young bear's run for him, wearing his paws to the bone, just because he's too lazy to go himself." "He does take advantage of people," said Mrs. Brown. "Why, he even left his old suit on the porch this morning to be collected by our laundry for cleaning." "Did he?" exclaimed Mrs. Brown grimly. "Well, we'll soon see about that." She hurried out to the front porch and then called out to Mrs. Brown, "You did say the porch." "That's right," replied Mrs. Brown, "in the corner." "It's not there now," called Mrs. Bird. "Someone must have taken it away." "That's very strange," said Mrs. Brown. "I didn't hear anyone knock, and the laundryman hasn't been yet. How very odd." "Does serve him right," said Mrs. Bird as she returned to the kitchen. "If someone's taken it, that'll teach him a lesson." In spite of her stern appearance, Mrs. Bird was a kindly soul at heart, but she became very cross when people took advantage of others, especially Paddington. "Oh, well," said Mrs. Brown, "I expect it'll sort itself out. I must try and remember to ask Paddington if he's seen it when he comes in." As it happened, Paddington was gone for quite a long time, so that when he did finally return, Mrs. Brown had forgotten all about the matter. It had been dark for some time when he let himself into the garden by the back way. He pushed his basket up the path until he reached Mr. Brown's shed, and then, after a struggle, managed to lift a large object out of the box and place it in a corner behind the lawnmower. There was also a small cardboard box marked Guy Fawkes, which rattled when he shook it. Paddington shut the door of the shed, carefully hid the cardboard box underneath his hat in the bottom of the basket, and then crept quietly out of the garden and round to the front door. He felt pleased with himself. It had been a very good evening's work indeed, much better than he had expected. And that night, when he went to sleep, he spent a long time writing a letter to Jonathan in which he told him all about it. "Gosh, Paddington!" exclaimed Jonathan several days later when he were getting ready for the display. What a super lot of fireworks!" He peered into the cardboard box, which was full, almost to the brim. "I've never seen so many." "Honestly, Paddington," said Judy admiringly, "anyone would think you've been collecting in the street or something." Paddington waved a paw vaguely through the air and exchanged a knowing glance with Jonathan. But before he had time to explain things to Judy, Mr. Brown entered the room. He was dressed in an overcoat and gumboots, and he was carrying a light candle. "Right," he said. "Are we all ready? Mr. Gruber's waiting in the hall, and Mrs. Bird's got the chairs all ready from the veranda." Mr. Brown looked as eager as anyone to start the firework display, and he eyed Paddington's box enviously. "I vote," he said, holding up his hand for silence when they were all outside in the garden, "that as this is Paddington's first November the 5th, we let him set off the first firework." "Hear, hear," applauded Mr. Gruber. "What sort would you like, Mr. Brown?" Oh, wrong voice. "Hear, hear," applauded Mr. Gruber. "What sort would you like, Mr. Brown?" Paddington looked carefully at the box. There were so many different shapes and sizes, it was difficult to decide. "I think I'll have one of those you can hold in the paw first," he said. "I think I'll have a sparkler." "Dull things, sparklers," said Mr. Curry, who was sitting in the best chair helping himself to some marmalade sandwiches. "If Paddington wants a sparkler, he shall have one," said Mrs. Bird, giving Mr. Curry a freezing look. Mr. Brown handed Paddington the candle, taking care not to let the hot wax drip onto his fur. And there was a round of applause when the sparkler burst into life. Paddington waved it over his head several times, and there was another round of applause as he moved it up and down to spell out the letters Paddingtun. "Very effective," said Mr. Gruber. "But that's not how you spell Paddington," grumbled Mr. Curry, his mouth full of sandwich. "It's how I spell it," said Paddington. He gave Mr. Curry one of his special hard stares, but unfortunately it was dark, and so the full effect was lost. "How about lighting the bonfire?" said Mr. Brown hurriedly. "Then we can all see what we're doing." There was a crackle from the dried leaves as he bent down to apply the match. "That's better," said Mr. Curry, rubbing his hands together. "I find it rather drafty on this veranda of yours. I think I'll let off a few more fireworks if there are no other sandwiches left." He looked across at Mrs. Bird. "There aren't," said Mrs. Bird. "You've just had the last one. Honestly," she continued as Mr. Curry moved away and began rummaging in Paddington's box. "The cheek of some people. And he never even brought so much as a Catherine wheel himself." "He does spoil things," said Mrs. Brown. "Everyone's been looking forward to this evening. I've got a good mind." Whatever Mrs. Brown had been about to say was lost as there came a cry from the direction of the garden shed. "Crikey, Paddington!" shouted Jonathan. "Why ever didn't you tell us?" "Tell us what?" asked Mr. Brown, trying to divide his attention between a Roman candle which had just fizzled out and the mysterious object which Jonathan was dragging from the shed. "It's a guy!" shouted Judy with delight. "It's a super one, too. It looks just like a real person. Is it yours, Paddington?" "Well," said Paddington, "yes and no." He looked rather worried. In the excitement, he had quite forgotten about the guy which he'd used when he collected the money for fireworks. He wasn't at all sure he wanted the others to know about it in case too many questions were asked. "A guy," said Mr. Curry. "Then it had better go on the bonfire." He peered at it through the smoke. For some reason, there was a familiar look about it which he couldn't place. "Oh, no," said Paddington hurriedly. "I don't think you'd better do that. It's not really for burning." "Nonsense, Bear," said Mr. Curry. "I can see you don't know much about Guy Fawkes Night. Guys are always burned." He pushed the others on one side, and with the help of Mr. Brown's garden rake, placed the guy on top of the bonfire. "There!" he exclaimed as he stood back, rubbing his hands. "That's better. That's what I call a bonfire." Mr. Brown removed his glasses, polished them, and then looked hard at the bonfire. He didn't recognize the suit the guy was wearing, and he was glad to see it wasn't one of his. All the same, he had a nasty feeling at the back of his mind. It seems a very well-dressed sort of guy," he remarked. Mr. Curry started and then stepped forward to take a closer look. Now that the bonfire was well and truly lit, it was easier to see. The trousers were blazing merrily, and the jacket had just started to smolder. His eyes nearly popped out, and he pointed a trembling finger toward the flames. "That's my suit!" he roared. "My suit! The one you were supposed to send to the cleaners!" "What?" exclaimed Mr. Brown. Everyone turned to look at Paddington. Paddington was as surprised as the others. It was the first he had heard of Mr. Curry's suit. "I found it on the doorstep," he said. "I thought it had been put there for the rummage sale." "Rummage sale!" cried Mr. Curry, almost beside himself with rage. "The rummage sale! My best suit! I'll... Mr. Curry was sputtering so much he couldn't think of anything to say. But Mrs. Bird could. "To start with," she said, "it wasn't your best suit. It's been sent to the cleaners at least 6 times to my knowledge, and I'm quite sure Paddington didn't know it was yours. In any case," she finished triumphantly, "who was it insisted it should go on the bonfire in the first place?" Mr. Brown tried hard not to laugh, and then he caught Mr. Gruber's eye looking at him over the top of his handkerchief. "Well, you did, you know," he sputtered. "You said put it on the bonfire, and Paddington tried to stop you." Mr. Curry struggled hard for a moment as he looked from one to the other, but he knew he was beaten. He gave one final glare all around the party, then stalked off into the night. A moment later, the sound of a front door being slammed echoed around the houses. "Well," chuckled Mr. Gruber, "I must say that when young Mr. Brown's all around, there's never a dull moment." He felt underneath his chair and brought out a cardboard box. "Now, I vote we get on with the display, and just in case we run out of fireworks, I've brought a few more along." "You know, it's funny you should say that," said Mr. Brown, feeling under his chair, "but I have some as well." Afterwards, everyone in the neighborhood voted it was the best firework display they had seen for many a year. Quite a number of people turned up to watch, and even Mr. Curry was seen peeping from behind his curtains on several occasions. As Paddington lifted the tired paw and waved the last sparkler in the air, he spelled out the words THEEND. The end. Everyone agreed they had never seen such a successful bonfire before. or such a well-dressed guy. Hey, Starling, how are you? Welcome in. Well, I can see tonight is turning out to be a dead copy of last night. Hey, Crazy Mama, how are you? Just coming to the conclusion that while I love TikTok and I love the TikTok shop, it doesn't love me, at least not recently. That's all right. Well, as long as you guys are enjoying it, that's really all that matters to me, to be honest with you. I mean, truth be told, I would be doing it whether there was 500 people in here or just 5. That's the truth. Let's see, live analysis. Oh, real-time performance. Okay, so this tells me the exact same thing that it tells me. That's just dumb. Oh, my goodness. Well, that's funny. Well, Mindy, I am glad you're here. I'm glad you found us. Naomi, welcome. Oh, Crazy Mama, no worries. I am just glad you're here, regardless of what time you come in. So tired? Yeah, I know that feeling. I do so know that feeling. All right, well, let us move on. Chapter 5, Trouble at Number 32. That evening, after the bonfire had died away, the weather suddenly became even colder. When Paddington went upstairs to bed, he opened his window a few inches and peeped out in case there were any more fireworks to see. He sniffed the cold night air and then hastily shut the window, diving into bed and pulling the blankets over his ears. In the morning he woke much earlier than usual, shivering with cold, and found to his surprise that the ends of his whiskers had become uncovered during the night, were quite stiff, which had become When Paddington, let's see here. In the morning, he woke much earlier than usual, shivering with cold, and found to his surprise that the ends of his whiskers, which had become uncovered during the night, were quite stiff. Having listened for a while to make sure breakfast was being cooked, he put on his duffel coat and went along to the bathroom. He reached the bathroom. Paddington made several interesting discoveries. First, his flannel, which he'd left folded over the towel rail the night before, was stiff as a board, and it made a funny crackling noise when he tried to bend it straight. Then, when he turned the tap, nothing happened. Paddington decided quite quickly that he wasn't meant to wash that morning, and he hurried back to his own room. But when he got there, he had yet another surprise. He drew the curtains and tried to look out of his window, only to find that it was all white and frosted, just like the one in the bathroom. Paddington breathed heavily on the glass and rubbed it with the back of his paw. When he had made a hole big enough to peer through, he nearly fell over backwards with astonishment. All traces of the previous evening's bonfire had completely vanished. Instead, everything was covered by a thick blanket of white. Not only that, but there were millions of large white flakes falling out of the sky. He rushed downstairs to tell the others. The Browns were all sitting round the breakfast table when he burst into the dining room. Paddington waved his paws wildly in the air and called for them to look out of the window.
"Good heavens!" exclaimed Mr. Brown, looking up from his morning paper. "What's the matter?" "Look," said Paddington, pointing towards the garden. "Everything's gone on white." Judy threw her head back and laughed. "It's all right, Paddington. It's only snow. It happens every year." "Snow?" said Paddington, looking puzzled. "What's snow?" "It's a nuisance," said Mr. Brown crossly. Mr. Brown wasn't in a very good mood that morning. He hadn't expected the weather to change so quickly, and all the upstairs water pipes had frozen. To make matters worse, everyone had been blaming him because he'd forgotten to stoke the boiler before going to bed. "Snow?" said Judy. "Well, it's sort of frozen rain. It's very soft." "Jolly good for snowballs," exclaimed Jonathan. "We'll show you how to make them after breakfast. We can clear up the paths at the same time." Paddington sat down at the breakfast table and began undoing his napkin, hardly able to take his eyes off the scene outside the window. "Paddington," said Mrs. Brown suspiciously, "did you wear your duffel coat when you washed this morning?" "A lick and a promise," said Mrs. Bird as she handed him a steaming bowl of porridge. "More promise than lick, if you ask me." But Paddington was much too busy thinking about the snow to hear what they were saying. He was wondering if he could speed up the breakfast by having all his things on one plate. But just as he reached out for the bacon and eggs and marmalade, he caught Mrs. Bird's eye and hurriedly pretended he was only conducting to the music on the wireless. "If you do go out after breakfast, Paddington," said Mrs. Brown, "I think it would be nice if you could clear Mr. Curry's path for him before you do ours. We all know it wasn't your fault about his suit last night, but it would show you mean well." "That's a good idea," exclaimed Jonathan. "We'll give you a hand. Then we can use all the snow we get to build a snowman this afternoon. How about it, Paddington?" Paddington looked rather doubtful. Whenever he tried to do anything for Mr. Curry, something always seemed to go wrong. "But no playing snowballs," warned Mrs. Bird. "Mr. Curry always sleeps with his bedroom window open, even in the middle of winter. If you wake him, he won't like it at all." Paddington, Jonathan, and Judy agreed to be as quiet as they could. As soon as the breakfast was over, they dressed in their warmest clothes and rushed outside to look at the snow. Paddington was very impressed. It was much deeper than he had expected, but not at all as cold as he thought it would be, except when he stood for very long in the one place. Within a few minutes, all three were busy with shovels and brooms, clearing Mr. Curry's paths for him. Jonathan and Judy started on the pavement outside his house. Paddington fetched his seaside bucket and spade and began to work on Mr. Curry's back garden path, which was not quite so wide. He filled his bucket with snow and then tipped it through a hole in the Browns' fence near the place they intended building a snowman later in the day. It was hard work, for the snow was deep and came right up to the edge of his duffel coat, and as soon as he cleared a space, more snow came down, covering the part he'd just done. After working for what seemed like hours, Paddington decided to have a rest. But no sooner had he settled himself on the bucket than something hit him in the back of the head, nearly knocking his hat off into the bargain. "Got you!" yelled Jonathan with delight. "Come on, Paddington, make yourself some snowballs. Then we can have a fight." Paddington jumped up from his bucket and dodged round the side of Mr. Curry's shed. Then, after first making sure Mrs. Bird was nowhere in sight, he gathered up some snow and rolled it into a hard ball, holding it firmly in his right paw. He closed his eyes and took careful aim. "Yeah!" shouted Jonathan as Paddington opened his eyes. "Missed me by a mile. You better get some practice in." Paddington stood behind Mr. Curry's shed, scratching his head and examining his paw. He knew the snowball must have gone somewhere, but he hadn't the least idea where. After thinking about it for some time, he decided to have another go. If he crept very carefully round the side of the house, he might even be able to catch Jonathan unawares and get his own back. It was as he tiptoed past Mr. Curry's back door, clutching a snowball in his paw, that he noticed for the first time the door was open. The wind was blowing the snow through the kitchen, and there was already a small pile of it on the mat. Paddington hesitated for a moment, then pulled the door shut. There was a click as it closed, and he carefully tested it with his paw to make certain it was properly fastened. He was sure Mr. Curry wouldn't want snow all over his kitchen floor, and he felt very pleased at being able to do another good deed, apart from sweeping the path. To Paddington's surprise, when he peered round the corner at the front of the house, Mr. Curry was already there. He was wearing a dressing gown over his pajamas, and he looked cold and cross. He broke off his conversation with Jonathan and Judy and stared at Paddington's direction. "There you are, Bear," he exclaimed. "Have you been throwing snowballs?" "Snowballs?" repeated Paddington, hurriedly putting his jaw behind his back. "Did you say snowballs, Mr. Curry?" "Yes," said Mr. Curry. "Snowballs. A large one came through my bedroom window a moment ago and landed right in the middle of my bed. Now it's all melted on my hot water bottle. If I thought you had done it on purpose, Bear—" "Oh, no, Mr. Curry," said Paddington earnestly. "I wouldn't do a thing like that on purpose. I don't think I could. It's difficult throwing snowballs by paw, especially big ones like that." "Like what?" asked Mr. Curry suspiciously. "Like the one that you said landed in your bed," said Paddington, sounding rather confused. He was beginning to wish Mr. Curry would hurry up and go. The snowball was making his paw very cold. Said Mr. Curry. "Well, I'm not standing out here in the snow discussing Bear's pranks. I came downstairs intending to tell you off." He looked round improvingly at the clean pavement. "But I must admit I've been pleasantly surprised. In fact," he turned to go back indoors, "if you make a good job of the rest, I might even give you 10 pence. Between you," he added, in case they mistook his meaning. 10 pence? Exclaimed Jonathan disgustedly. "One measly 10-penny piece?" "Oh, well," said Judy, "at least we've done our good deed for the day. It should last for a while, even with Mr. Curry." Paddington looked doubtful. "I don't think it'll last very long," he said, listening hard. "In fact, I think it's nearly over." Even as he spoke, there came a roar of rage from Mr. Curry, followed by several loud bangs. Whatever's up now?" exclaimed Judy. "That sounds like Mr. Curry's banging on his back door." "I thought I was doing him a good turn," said Paddington, looking very worried, "so I shut it. I think he must be locked out." "Oh, gosh, Paddington, You are an unlucky bear today." "Who shut my door?" roared Mr. Curry as he strode to the front again. "Who locked me out of my house? Bear!" he barked. "Where are you, Bear?" Mr. Curry glared down the road, but there was not a soul in sight. If he had been a little less cross, he might have noticed 3 distinct sets of paw prints and footprints where Paddington, Jonathan, and Judy had beaten a hasty retreat. It's an odd-looking H. And after a distance, the 3 tracks separated. Jonathan and Judy's disappeared into the Browns' house. Paddington's went towards the market. He had seen quite enough of Mr. Curry for one day. Besides, it had gone 10:30, and he had promised to meet Mr. Gruber for morning coffee at 11. "I really think Mr. Curry has gone a bit funny in the head," said Mrs. Brown later that day. "He was standing outside the house in his pajamas, dressing gown this morning, in all that snow. Then he started running around in circles, waving his fist." Replied Mrs. Bird. "I saw Paddington playing snowballs in his back garden just before that happened." "Oh, dear," said Mrs. Brown. She looked out of the window. The sky had cleared at last, and the garden, with all the trees bowed down under the weight of snow, looked just like a Christmas card. "It seems very still," she said, "almost as if something was about to happen." Mrs. Bird followed her gaze. "They've made a wonderful snowman. I've never seen quite a good one before. It's only small, but it looks most lifelike." "Isn't that Paddington's old hat they've put on top?" asked Mrs. Brown. She looked round as the door opened and Jonathan and Judy entered the room. "We were just saying," she continued, "what a lovely snowman you've made." "It isn't a snowman," said Jonathan mysteriously. "It's a snow bear. It's meant to be a surprise for Dad. He's coming down the road now." "It looks as if he'll have more than one surprise coming his way," said Mrs. Bird. "I can see Mr. Curry waiting for him by the fence." "Oh, crikey, that's torn it." "Trust Mr. Curry to spoil things," said Judy. "I hope he doesn't keep Dad talking too long." "Why, dear?" asked Mrs. Brown. "Does it matter?" "Does it matter?" cried Jonathan, rushing to the window. "I say it does." Mrs. Brown didn't pursue the subject. She had no doubt she would hear all about it in due course, whatever it was. It took Mr. Brown a long time to get rid of Mr. Curry and put his car away in the garage. When he did come indoors, he looked very fed up. "That's Mr. Curry," he exclaimed, "telling tales about Paddington again. If I'd been there this morning, he'd have got more than a snowball in his bed." He looked round the room. "By the way, where is Paddington?" Paddington usually liked helping Mr. Brown put his car away, and it was most unusual for him not to be there, ready to give paw signals. "I haven't seen him for ages," said Mrs. Brown. She looked at Jonathan and Judy. "Do you know where he is?" "Didn't he jump out at you, Dad?" asked Jonathan. "Jump out at me?" exclaimed Mr. Brown, looking puzzled. "Not that I know of. Why, was he supposed to?" "But you saw the snow bear, didn't you?" asked Judy. "Just by the garage." "Snow bear?" said Mr. Brown. "Good heavens, you don't mean that wasn't Paddington?" "What's that young bear been up to now?" asked Mrs. Bird. "Do you mean to say he's been out there covered in snow this whole time? I've never heard of such a thing." "Well, it wasn't really his idea," said Jonathan. "Not all of it. I expect he heard Mr. Curry's voice and got frightened," said Judy. "Just you bring him indoors at once," said Mrs. Bird. "Why, he might catch his death of cold. I've a good mind to send him to bed without any supper." It wasn't that Mrs. Bird was cross with Paddington. She was simply worried in case anything happened to him. And when he came through the door, her manner changed at once. She took one of his paws in her hand and then felt his nose. "Good gracious!" she exclaimed. "He's like an iceberg." Paddington shivered. "I don't think I like being a snow bear very much," he said in a weak voice. "I should think not, indeed," exclaimed Mrs. Bird. She turned to the others. "That bear's going to bed at once, with a hot water bottle and a bowl of broth. Then I'm sending for the doctor." With that, she made Paddington sit by the fire while she hurried upstairs to fetch a thermometer. Paddington lay back in Mr. Brown's armchair with his eyes closed. He certainly felt very strange. He couldn't remember ever having felt like it before. One moment he seemed to be as cold as the snow outside. The next he felt as if he was on fire. He wasn't quite sure how long he lay there, but he vaguely remembered Mrs. Bird sticking something long and cold under his tongue, which she told him not to bite. After that he didn't remember much more, except that everyone started running around preparing soup and filling hot water bottles, and generally making sure his room was comfortable for him. Within a few minutes everything was ready, and the Browns all trooped upstairs to make sure he was properly tucked in bed. Paddington thanked them all very much, and then, after waving a paw limply in their direction, lay back and closed his eyes. "He must be feeling bad," whispered Mrs. Bird. "He hasn't even touched his soup." "Gosh," said Jonathan miserably as he followed Judy down the stairs. "It was mostly my idea. I shall never forgive myself if anything happens to him." "It was my idea as well," said Judy comfortingly. "I expect we all did it together anyway," she added as the front door bell rang. "That must be the doctor, so we shall soon know." Dr. McAndrew was a long time with Paddington, and when he came downstairs again, he looked very serious. "How is he, Doctor?" asked Mrs. Brown anxiously. "He's not seriously ill, is he?" "Aye, he is," said Dr. McAndrew. "You may as well know that young bear's very ill indeed. Playing in the snow, and he's not used to it, no doubt. I've given him a wee drop of medicine to tide him over, and I'll be along first thing in the morning." "But he's going to be all right, isn't he, Dr. McAndrew?" cried Judy. Dr. McAndrew shook his head gravely. "I wouldn't care to give an opinion," he said. "I wouldn't care to give an opinion at all." With that, he bade them all good night and drove away. It was a very sad party of Browns that went upstairs that evening. While they were getting ready for bed, Mrs. Bird quietly moved her things into Paddington's room so that she could keep an eye on him during the night. But she wasn't the only one who couldn't think of sleep. Several times the door to Paddington's room gently opened, and either Mr. and Mrs. Brown or Jonathan and Judy crept in to see how he was doing. Somehow it didn't seem possible that anything could happen to Paddington, but every time they looked at Mrs. Bird, she shook her head and went on with her sewing, so they couldn't see her face. The next day the news of Paddington's illness quickly spread through the neighborhood, and by lunchtime there was a steady stream of callers asking after him. Mr. Gruber was the first one on the scene.
"I wondered what had happened to young Mr. Brown when he didn't turn up for elevensies this morning," he said, looking very upset. "They kept his cocoa hot for over an hour."
Mr. Gruber went away again, but he returned shortly afterwards carrying a bunch of grapes and a large basket of fruit and flowers from the rest of the traders in the Portobello market.
"I'm afraid there isn't much about at this time of year," he said apologetically. "But we've done the best we can."
He paused at the door.
"I'm sure he's all right, Mrs. Brown," he said. "With so many other people wanting him to get well, I'm sure he will."
Mr. Gruber raised his hat to Mrs. Brown and then began walking slowly in the direction of the park. Somehow he didn't want to go back to his shop that day. Even Mr. Curry knocked on the door that afternoon and brought with him an apple and a jar of calf's foot jelly, which he said was very good for invalids. Mrs. Bird took all the presents up to Paddington's room and placed them carefully beside his bed in case he should wake up and want something to eat. Dr. McAndrew called a number of times during the next 2 days, but despite everything he did, there seemed to be no change at all.
"You'll just have to bide our time," was all he said.
It was 3 days later, at breakfast time, when the door to the Browns' dining room burst open and Mrs. Bird rushed in. "Oh, do come quickly," she cried. "It's Paddington." Everyone jumped up from the table and stared at Mrs. Bird. He's not worse, is he?" asked Mrs. Brown, voicing the thoughts of them all. "Mercy me, no," said Mrs. Bird, fanning herself with the morning paper. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. He's much better. He's sitting up in bed asking for a marmalade sandwich." "A marmalade sandwich?" exclaimed Mrs. Brown. "Oh, thank goodness." She wasn't quite sure whether she wanted to laugh or cry. I never knew hearing the word marmalade could make me feel so happy. Just as she spoke, there was a loud ring from the bell which Mr. Brown had installed by the side of Paddington's bed in case of emergency. "Oh, dear!" exclaimed Mrs. Bird. "I hope I haven't spoken too soon." She rushed out of the room, and everyone followed her up the stairs to Paddington's room. When they entered, Paddington was lying on his back with his paws in the air, staring up at the ceiling. Excuse me. "Paddington," called Mrs. Brown, hardly daring to breathe. "Paddington, are you all right?" Everyone listened anxiously for the reply.
"I think I've had a bit of a relapse," said Paddington in a weak voice. "I think I'd better have 2 marmalade sandwiches just to be sure."
There was a sigh of relief from the Browns and Mrs. Bird as they exchanged glances. Even if he wasn't quite himself yet, Paddington was definitely on the road to recovery. Alrighty then. Chapter 6. Paddington and the Christmas Shopping. The few weeks before Christmas were usually busy ones for the Mrs. Bird. There were so many mince pies, puddings, and cakes to be made that much of her time was spent in the kitchen. This year, matters hadn't been helped by the fact that Paddington was at home for most of the day, convalescing after his illness.
I swear I'm not asleep.
Paddington was very interested in mince pies, and if he had opened the oven door to see how they were getting on, he'd done it a dozen times. Paddington's convalescence had been a difficult time for the Browns. While he remained in bed, it had been bad enough, because he kept getting grape pips all over the sheets. But if anything, matters had got worse once he was up and about. He wasn't very good at doing nothing, and it had become a full-time occupation, keeping him amused and out of trouble. He had even had several goes at knitting something. No one ever quite knew what. But he'd got in such a tangle with the wool, and it had become so sticky with marmalade, that in the end they had to throw it away. Even the dustman had said very nasty things about it when he came to collect the rubbish. "He seems very quiet at the moment," said Mrs. Brown. "I think he's busy with his Christmas list." "You're not really taking him shopping with you this afternoon, are you?" asked Mrs. Bird. "You know what happened last time." Mrs. Brown sighed. She had vivid memories of the last time she had taken Paddington shopping. "I can't not take him," she said. "I did promise, and he's been looking forward to it so much." Paddington liked shopping. He always enjoyed looking in the shop windows, and since he had read in the paper about all the Christmas decorations, he had thought of very little else. Besides, he had a special reason for wanting to go shopping this time. Although he hadn't told anyone, Paddington had been saving hard for some while in order to buy the Browns and his other friends some presents. He had already bought a frame for his picture and sent it together with a large jar of honey to his Aunt Lucy in Peru, because presents for overseas had to be posted early. He had several lists marked out, secret, which were locked away in his case, and he had been keeping his ears open for some time, listening to conversation in the hope of finding something they all needed. "Anyway," said Mrs. Brown, "it's so nice having him around again, and he's been so good lately. I think he ought to have a treat. Besides," she added, "I'm not taking him to Barkridge's this time. I'm taking him to Crumble and Ferns." Mrs. Bird put down her baking tray. Jeez. "Are you sure you're doing the right thing taking him there?" she exclaimed. "You know what they are like." Crumbled and Ferns was a very old, established shop where everyone spoke in whispers and all the assistants wore frock coats. Only the best people went to Crumbled and Ferns. "It's Christmas," said Mrs. Brown recklessly. "It'll be a nice treat for him." And when Paddington set off with Mrs. Brown after lunch, even Mrs. Bird had to admit he looked smart enough to go anywhere. His duffel coat, which had just come back from the cleaners, was spotlessly clean, and even his whole old hat, which Paddington always insisted on wearing when he went on shopping expeditions, looked unusually neat. At the same time, Paddington waved his paw at the corner, and Mrs. Bird turned back to go indoors. She couldn't help feeling glad she was staying at home. Paddington enjoyed the journey to Crumbled and Ferns. They went by bus, and he managed to get a front seat downstairs. By standing on the seat, he could just see through the little hole in the screen behind the driver's back. Paddington tapped on the glass several times and waved his paw at the man behind the wheel, but he was much too busy with the traffic to look round. In fact, they drove a long way without stopping at all. The conductor was cross when he saw what Paddington was doing.
"Oi!" he shouted. "Stop there tapping. It's bears like you that make you what get buses a bad name. We've gone past 3 queues already."
But he was a kindly man, and when Paddington said he was sorry, he explained to him all about the signals for making buses stop or go on, and he gave him the end of a roll of tickets as a present. When he had collected all the fares, he came back again and pointed out some buildings of interest to Paddington as they passed them. He even presented him with a large bullseye which he found in his money bag. Paddington liked seeing new places, and he was sorry when the journey came to an end, and he had to say goodbye to the conductor. There was another slight upset. Jeez. I think my glasses aren't working. They've gone bad. There was another slight upset when they reached Crumbledon Ferns. Paddington had an accident with the revolving door. It wasn't really his fault, but he tried to follow Mrs. Brown into the store just as a very distinguished-looking gentleman with a beard came out of the other side, and the man was in a great hurry, and when he pushed the revolving door, it started going round at great speed, taking Paddington with it. He went round several times until he found, to his astonishment, that he was outside on the pavement once more. He had a brief glimpse of the man with the beard waving to him from the back of a large car as it drove away. The man also appeared to be shouting something, but Paddington never knew what it was, for at the moment he trod on something sharp and fell over back again. He sat in the middle of the pavement, examining his foot, and found to his surprise that it had a tie pin sticking in it. Paddington knew it was a tie pin because Mr. Brown had one very like it, except that his was quite ordinary, whereas this one had something big and shiny fixed to the middle of it. Paddington pinned it to the front of his duffel for safety, and then suddenly became aware someone who was speaking to him.
"Are you all right, sir?"
It was the doorkeeper, very dignified man in a smart uniform with lots of medals.
"I think so,"
said Paddington as he stood up and dusted himself. "But I've lost my bullseye somewhere."
"Your bullseye?" said the man. "Dear me."
He felt surprised. He showed no signs of it. Doorkeepers at Crumbled Farms were always very well trained. All the same, he couldn't keep wondering about Paddington. When he noticed the tie pin with the enormous diamond in the middle of it, he realized at once that he was dealing with someone very important.
Probably one of those society bears,
he thought to himself. But when he caught the sight of Paddington's old hat, he wasn't quite sure.
Perhaps he's a hunting, shooting, and fishing bear, up from the country for the day, he decided. Or even a society bear that's seen better days.
So he held up the passers-by with a stern wave of the hand while they searched the pavement. As he guided Paddington back through the revolving door to Mrs. Brown, who was anxiously waiting on the other side, he tried hard to look as if helping a young bear of quality behind... Man. As he guided Paddington back through the revolving door to Mrs. Brown, who was waiting anxiously on the other side, he tried hard to look as if helping a young bear of quality find his bullseye was an everyday event at Crumbled and Ferns. Jeez. Paddington returned his salute with a wave of his paw and then looked round. The inside of the shop was most impressive. Everywhere they went, tall men in frock coats bowed low and wished them good morning. Paddington's paw was quite tired by the time they reached the household department. As they both had some secret shopping to do, Mrs. Brown left Paddington with the assistant and arranged to meet him outside the entrance to the shop in a quarter of an hour. The man assured Mrs. Brown that Paddington would be quite safe. "I don't recall any actual bears," he said, when she explained that Paddington came from darkest Peru. "We have a number of very distinguished foreign gentlemen amongst our risks. Many of them all do their Christmas shopping here." He turned and looked down at Paddington as Mrs. Brown left, brushing an emergency speck of dust from his frock coat. Secretly, Paddington was feeling rather overawed by Crumbled and Ferns, and not wishing to disgrace Mrs. Brown by doing the wrong thing, he gave his own coat a passing tap with his paw. The assistant watched with fascination as a small cloud of dust rose into the air and then slowly settled on his nice, clean counter. Paddington followed the man's gaze. "I expect it came off the pavement," he said by way of explanation. "I had an accident in the revolving door." The man coughed. "Oh dear, how very unfortunate." He gave Paddington a sickly smile and decided to ignore the whole matter. "What can we do for you, sir?" Paddington looked round carefully to make sure Mrs. Brown was nowhere in sight. "I want a clothesline," he announced. "A what?" Paddington hurriedly moved the bullseye to the other side of his mouth. "A clothesline one," he repeated in a muffled voice. "It's for Mrs. Bird. Her old one broke the other day." Paddington hurriedly moved... Holy cow. The assistant swallowed hard. He found it impossible to understand what this extraordinary young bear was saying. "Perhaps," he suggested, for a Crumbled Ferns assistant barely bent down, "you wouldn't mind standing on the counter." You guys, I'm going to quickly pause the live. I'll be right back. Just bear with me here.
Okay, I'm back. Apparently it didn't pause the way I thought it would. Oh, well. Oh, yeah. No, I'm fine. I had something in my eye. I had to go clean. I had to go wash it out because I was sitting here reading and I'm like, my eyes are just like going all over the place. Yeah, well, I appreciate the concern. All right, let's see what we got going on here. All right. The assistant swallowed hard. He found it impossible to understand what this extraordinary young bear was saying. Perhaps, he suggested, for a crumbled in ferns assistant rarely bent down, you wouldn't mind standing on the counter. Paddington sighed. It really was most difficult trying to explain things sometimes. Climbing up on the counter, he unlocked his suitcase and withdrew an advertisement which he had cut from Mr. Brown's newspaper several days before. Ah, the assistant's face cleared. You mean one of our special expanding clotheslines, sir. He reached up to a shelf and picked out a small green box. Very suitable choice, if I may say so, sir. As befits a young bear of taste, I can thoroughly recommend it. The man pulled a piece of rope through a hole in the side of the box and handed it to Paddington. This type of expanding clothesline is used by some of the best families in the country. Paddington looked suitably impressed as he climbed down, holding on to the rope with his paw. You see, continued the man, bending over the counter, it's all quite simple. The clothesline is all contained inside this box. As you walk away with the rope, it unwinds itself. Then, when you have finished with it, you simply turn this handle. A puzzled note came into his face. You simply turn this handle, he repeated again. Really, it was almost annoying. Instead of the clothesline going back into the box as it was supposed to, there was actually more coming out. I'm extremely sorry, sir, he began, looking up from the counter. Sometimes something seems to have jammed. His voice trailed away, and a worried look came into his eyes, for Paddington was nowhere in sight. I say, he called to another assistant farther down the counter, have you seen a young bear gentleman go past pulling on a clothesline? He went that way, replied the other man briefly. He pointed towards the china department. I think he got caught in the crowd. Oh, dear, said Paddington's assistant as he picked up the green box and began pushing his way through the crowd of shoppers, following the trail of the clothesline. Oh, dear, oh, dear. As it happened, the assistant wasn't the only one to feel worried. At the other end of the clothesline, Paddington was already in trouble. Crumbled and Ferns was filled with people doing their Christmas shopping, and none of them seemed to have time for a small bear. Several times he had to crawl under a table in order to avoid being trodden on. It was a very good clothesline, and Paddington felt sure Mrs. Bird would like it, but he couldn't help wishing he'd chosen something else. There seemed to be no end to it, and he kept getting it tangled around people's legs. He went on and on, round a table laden with cups and saucers, past a pillar, underneath another table, and still the clothesline trailed after him. All the time the crowd was getting thicker and thicker, and Paddington had to push hard to make any headway at all. Once or twice he nearly lost his hat. Just as he had almost given up hope of ever finding his way back to the household department again, he caught sight of the assistant.
To Paddington's surprise, the man was sitting on the floor, looking very red in the face. His hair was all ruffled, and he appeared to be struggling with a table leg. "Ah, there you are," he gasped when he caught sight of Paddington. "I suppose you realize, young bear, I've been following you around the whole China department. Now you've tied everything up in knots." "Oh, dear," said Paddington, looking at the rope. "Did I do that? I'm afraid I get lost. Bears aren't very good in crowds, you know. I must have gone under the same table twice." "What have you done with the other end?" shouted the assistant. He wasn't in the best of tempers. It was hot and noisy under the table, and people kept kicking him. Apart from it, it was most undignified. "It's here," said Paddington, trying to find his end of the rope. "At least, it seems it was a moment ago." "Where?" shouted the assistant. He didn't know whether it was simply the noise of the crowd, but he still couldn't understand a word this young bear uttered. Whenever he did say anything, it seemed to be accompanied by a strong crunching noise and a strong smell of peppermint. "Speak up!" he shouted, cupping a hand to his ear. "I can't hear a word you're saying." Paddington looked at the man uneasily. He looked rather cross, and he was beginning to wish he had left his bullseye on the pavement outside. It was a very nice bullseye, but it made talking almost difficult. It was as he felt in his duffel coat pocket for a handkerchief that it had happened. The assistant jumped slightly, and the expression on his face froze, and then gradually changed to one of disbelief. "Excuse me," said Paddington, tapping him on the shoulder, "but I think my bullseye has fallen in your ear." "Your bullseye?" exclaimed the man in a horrified tone of voice. "Fallen in my ear?" "Yes," said Paddington. It was given to me by a bus conductor, and I'm afraid it's got a bit slippery where I'd been sucking it." The assistant crawled out from under the table and drew himself up to his full height. Jeez. Wow, how did I lose my place? All right, we'll just go from here. "Your bullseye!" exclaimed the man in a horrified tone of voice. "Fallen in my ear?" "Yes," said Paddington. "It was given to me by a bus conductor, and I'm afraid it's got a bit slippery where I've been sucking it." The assistant crawled out from under the table and drew himself up to his full height. With a look of great distaste, he withdrew the remains of Paddington's bullseye from his ear. He held it for a moment between thumb and forefinger, and then hurriedly placed it on the nearby counter. It was bad enough having to crawl around the floor, untangling a clothesline, but to have a bullseye in his ear, such a thing had never been known before in Crumble and Ferns. He took a deep breath, and pointing a trembling finger in Paddington's direction, but as he opened his mouth to speak, he noticed that Paddington was no longer there. Neither, for that matter, was the clothesline. He was only just in time to grab the table as it rocked on its legs. As it was, several plates and a cup and saucer fell to the floor. The assistant raised his eyes to the ceiling and made a mental note to avoid any young bears who came into the shop in the future. There seemed to be a commotion going on in the direction of the entrance hall. He had his own ideas on the possible cause of it, but wisely he decided to keep his thoughts to himself. He had had quite enough to do with bear customers for one day. Mrs. Brown pushed her way through the crowd which had formed on the pavement outside Crumbled and Ferns. "Excuse me," she said, pulling on the doorkeeper's sleeve. "Excuse me. You haven't seen a young bear in a blue duffel coat, have you? We arranged to meet here and there, and there are so many people about, I'm rather worried." The doorkeeper touched his cap.
"That wouldn't be the young gentleman in question, ma'am?" he asked, pointing through a gap in the crowd to where another man in uniform was struggling with a revolving door. "If it is, he's stuck. Good and proper. Can't get in and can't get out. Right in the middle, he is, so to speak."
"Oh, dear," said Mrs. Brown. "That certainly sounds as if it might be Paddington."
Standing on tiptoe, she peered over the shoulder of a bearded gentleman in front of her. The man was shouting words of encouragement as he tapped on the glass, and she just caught a glimpse of a familiar paw as it waved back in acknowledgment.
"It is Paddington!" she exclaimed. "How on earth did he get in there?"
Said the doorkeeper. "That's just what we're trying to find out. Something to do with his getting a clothesline wrapped around the hinges, so they say."
There was a ripple of excitement from the crowd as the door started to revolve once more. Everyone made a rush for Paddington, but the distinguished man with the beard reached him first. To everyone's surprise, he took of his paw and began pumping it up and down.
"Thank you, Bear," he kept saying. "Glad to know you, Bear."
Glad to know you," repeated Paddington, looking as surprised as anyone.
"I say," exclaimed the doorkeeper respectfully as he turned to Mrs. Brown, "I didn't know he was a friend of Sir Grisham Gibbs."
"Neither did I," said Mrs. Brown. "And who might Sir Gresham Gibbs be?"
"Sir Gresham," repeated the doorkeeper in a hushed voice. "Why, he's a famous millionaire. He's one of Crumbled and Fern's most important customers."
He pushed back the crowd of interested spectators to allow Paddington and the distinguished man a free passage.
"Dear lady," said Sir Gresham, bowing low as he approached, "you must be Mrs. Brown. I've just been hearing all about you."
"Oh?" said Mrs. Brown thoughtfully.
"This young bear of yours found it most This young bear of yours found a most valuable diamond tie-pin which I lost earlier this afternoon," said Sir Gresham. "Not only that, but he's kept it in safe custody all this time."
"A diamond tie-pin?" exclaimed Mrs. Brown, looking at Paddington. It was the first she had heard of any diamond tie-pin. "I found it when I lost my bullseye," said Paddington in a loud stage whisper.
"An example to us all," boomed Sir Gresham as he turned to the crowd and pointed at Paddington.
Paddington waved a paw modestly in the air as one or two people applauded.
"Now, my dear lady," continued Sir Gresham, turning to Mrs. Brown, "I understand you intend showing this bear some of the Christmas decorations."
"Well," said Mrs. Brown, "I was hoping to. He hasn't seen them before, and it really is his first trip out since he was ill."
"In that case," said Sir Gresham, waving to a luxurious car which was parked by the side of the pavement, "my car is at your disposal."
"Oh," said Paddington, "is it really?" His eye glistened. He'd never seen such an enormous car before, let alone ever dreamt of riding in one.
"Yes, indeed,"
said Sir Gresham, as he held the door open for them.
"That is,"
he added as he noticed a worried expression on Cross Paddington's face,
"if you would do me the honor."
"Oh, yes," said Paddington politely. "I would like to do you the honor very much indeed." He hesitated. "But I've left my bullseye on one of the counters in Crimble and Ferns."
"Oh, dear,"
said the gentleman as he helped Paddington and Mrs. Brown into the car.
"There's only one thing we can do."
He tapped on the glass behind the driver with his stick.
"Drive on, James," he said, "and don't stop until we reach the nearest sweet shop."
"One with bullseyes, please, Mr. James," called Paddington.
"Definitely one with bullseyes," repeated Sir Gresham. "That's most important."
He turned to Mrs. Brown with a twinkle in his eyes.
"You know," he said, "I'm looking forward to this."
"So am I," said Paddington earnestly as he gazed out of the window at all the lights. As the huge car drew away from the curb, he stood on the seat and gave a final wave of his paw to the crowd of open-mouthed spectators, and then settled back, holding on to a long gold tassel with his other paw. It wasn't every day a bear who was able to ride around in London in such a magnificent car, and Paddington wanted to enjoy it to the full. Let's see what we got going on here. Okay. We are actually on the last chapter, actually. Hey, Tessa, how are you? Let's see. Sure, I'll be here on Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard. You are very welcome. And honestly, whenever you come in and hang out is fine with me. Alrighty then. Hi, Sammy. How are you? All right. Chapter 7. Christmas. Paddington found that Christmas took a long time to come. Each morning when he hurried downstairs, he crossed the date off the calendar. But more days he crossed off, the farther away it seemed. However, there was plenty to occupy his mind. For one thing, the postman started arriving later and later in the morning, and when he did finally reach the Browns' house, there were so many letters to deliver, he had a job to push them all through the letterbox. Often there were mysterious-looking parcels as well, which Mrs. Bird promptly hid before Paddington had time to squeeze them. A surprising number of the envelopes were addressed to Paddington himself, and he carefully made a list of all those who had sent him Christmas cards so that he could be sure of thanking them. You may be only a small bear," said Mrs. Bird as she helped him arrange the cards on the mantelpiece, "but you certainly leave your mark." Paddington wasn't sure how to take this, especially as Mrs. Bird had just polished the hall floor, but when he examined his paws, they were quite clean. Paddington had made his own Christmas cards. Some he had drawn himself, decorating the edges with holly and mistletoe. Others had been made out of pictures cut from Mrs. Brown's magazines. But each one had the words "A Merry Christmas" and "Happy New Year" printed on the front. And they were signed Paddington Brown on the inside, together with his special paw mark to show that they were genuine. Paddington wasn't sure about the spelling of "A Merry Christmas." It didn't look at all right, but Mrs. Bird checked all the words in a dictionary for him to make certain. "I don't suppose many people get Christmas cards from a bear," she explained. "They'll probably want to keep them, so you ought to make sure they are right." One evening, Mr. Brown arrived home with a huge Christmas tree tied to the roof of his car. It was placed in a position of honor. Holy cow. It was placed in a position of honor by the dining room window, and both Paddington and Mr. Brown spent a long time decorating it with colored electric lights and silver tinsel. Apart from the Christmas tree, there were paper chains and holly to be put up, and large colored bells made from crinkly paper. Paddington enjoyed doing the paper chains. He managed to persuade Mr. Brown that bears were very good at putting up decorations, and that together they did most of the house. Holy cow. With Paddington standing on Mr. Brown's shoulders while Mr. Brown handed up the drawing pins. It came to an unhappy end one evening when Paddington accidentally put his paw on a drawing pin which he'd left on top of Mr. Brown's head. When Mrs. Bird rushed into the room to see what all the fuss was about and inquire why all the lights had suddenly gone out, she found Paddington hanging by his paws from the chandelier and Mr. Brown dancing around the room, rubbing his head. By then the decorations were almost finished, and the house had taken on a quite festive air. The sideboard was groaning under the weight of nuts and oranges, dates and figs, none of which Paddington was allowed to touch, and Mr. Brown had stopped smoking his pipe and was filling the air instead with the smell of cigars. The excitement in the Browns' house mounted until it reached a fever pitch a few days before Christmas, when Jonathan and Judy arrived home for the holidays. But if the days leading up to Christmas were busy and exciting, they were nothing compared to Christmas Day. The Browns were up early on Christmas morning, much earlier than they had intended. It all started when Paddington woke to find a large pillowcase at the bottom of his bed. His eyes nearly popped out with astonishment when he switched the torch on, for it was bulging with parcels, and it certainly hadn't been there when he'd gone to bed. Paddington's eyes grew larger and larger as he unwrapped the brightly colored paper round each present. A few days before, on Mrs. Bird's instructions, he had made a list of all the things he hoped to have given him, and had hidden it up in one of the chimneys. It was a strange thing, but everything on that list seemed to be in the pillowcase. There was a large chemistry outfit from Mr. Brown, full of jars and bottles and test tubes, which looked very interesting. There was a miniature xylophone from Mrs. Brown, which pleased him to no end. Paddington was fond of music, especially the loud sort, which was good for conducting, and he had always wanted something he could actually play. Mrs. Bird's parcel was even more exciting, for it contained a checked cap which he'd specially asked for and had been underlined on his list. Paddington stood in the middle of his bed, admiring the effect in the mirror for quite a while. Jonathan and Judy had each given him a travel book. Paddington was very interested in geography, being a much-traveled bear, and he was pleased to see there were plenty of maps and colored pictures inside. I still got something in my eye. It's driving me nuts. The noise from Paddington's room was soon sufficient to wake both Jonathan and Judy, and in no time at all the whole house was in an uproar, with wrapping paper and bits of string everywhere.
"I'm as patriotic as the next man," grumbled Mr. Brown, "but I draw the line when bears start playing the national anthem at 6 o'clock in the morning, especially on a xylophone."
Yeah, the sign's not on because I forgot to charge the battery. That's totally on me. It's just been a crazy couple of days. As always, it was left to Mrs. Bird to restore order. "No more presents until after lunch," she said firmly. She had just tripped over Paddington on the upstairs landing, where he was investigating his new chemical outfit, and something nasty had gone in one of her slippers. "That's all right, Mrs. Bird," said Paddington, consulting his instruction book. "It's only some iron fillings. I don't think they're dangerous." "Dangerous or not," said Mrs. Bird, "I have a big dinner to cook, not to mention your birthday cake to finish decorating." Being a bear, Paddington had 2 birthdays each year, one in the summer and one at Christmas. The Browns were holding a party in his honor to which Mr. Gruber had been invited. After they'd had breakfast and been to church, the morning passed quickly, and Paddington spent most of his time trying to decide what to do next. With so many things from which to choose, it was most difficult. He read some chapters from his books and made several interesting smells and an explosion with his chemical outfit. Mr. Brown was already in trouble for having given it to him, especially when Paddington found a chapter in the instruction book headed Indoor Fireworks. He made himself a never-ending snake which wouldn't stop growing and frightened Mrs. Bird to death when she met it in coming downstairs. "If we don't watch out," she confided to Mrs. Brown, "we shan't last over Christmas. We shall either be blown to smithereens or poisoned. He was testing my gravy with some litmus paper just now." Mrs. Brown sighed. "It's a good job Christmas only comes once a year," she said as she helped Mrs. Bird with the potatoes. "It isn't over yet," warned Mrs. Bird. Fortunately, Mr. Gruber arrived at that moment, and some measure of order was established before they all sat down to dinner. Paddington's eyes glistened as he surveyed the table. He didn't agree with Mr. Brown when he said it all looked too good to eat. At the same time, even Paddington got noticeably slower towards the end when Mrs. Bird brought in the Christmas pudding.
"Well,"
said Mr. Gruber a few minutes later as he sat back and surveyed his empty plate,
"I must say that's the best Christmas dinner I've had for many a day. Thank you very much indeed."
"Hear, hear," agreed Mr. Brown. "What do you say, Paddington?" "It was very nice," said Paddington, licking some cream from his whiskers, "except I had a bone in my Christmas pudding." "You what?" exclaimed Mrs. Brown. "Don't be silly. There are no bones in Christmas pudding."
"I had one," said Paddington firmly. "It was all hard and got stuck in my throat."
"Good gracious!" exclaimed Mrs. Bird. "The 5 pence! I always put a piece of silver in the Christmas pudding."
"What?"
said Paddington, nearly falling off his chair.
"A 5 pence? I've never heard of a 5 pence pudding before."
"Quick!" shouted Mr. Brown, rising to the emergency. "Turn him upside down." Before Paddington could reply, he found himself hanging head downward, while Mr. Brown and Mr. Gruber took in turns shaking him. The rest of the family stood round watching the floor.
"It's no good," said Mr. Brown after a while. "I must have gone too far."
He helped Mr. Gruber lift Paddington into an armchair, where he lay gasping for breath.
"I've got a magnet upstairs," said Jonathan. "We could try and lowering it down his throat on a piece of string."
"I don't think so," said Mrs. Brown in a worried tone of voice. "He might swallow that, and then where should we be? Then we should be worse off." She bent over the chair. "How do you feel, Paddington?"
"Sick,"
said Paddington in an aggrieved tone of voice. "Of course you do, dear," said Mrs. Brown. "It's only to be expected. There's only one thing to do. We shall have to send for the doctor."
"Thank goodness I scrubbed it first," said Mrs. Bird. "It might have been covered with germs." "I didn't swallow it," gasped Paddington. "I only nearly did. Then I put it on the side of my plate. I didn't know it was a 5 pence because it was all covered with Christmas pudding."
Paddington felt very fed up. He'd just eaten one of the best dinners he could ever remember, and now he'd been turned upside down and shaken without even being given time to explain. Well, I am glad you guys enjoyed it, have enjoyed it, are still enjoying it. So we are almost done. Everyone exchanged glances and then crept quietly away, leaving Paddington to recover by himself. There didn't seem to be much they could say. But after the dinner, things had been cleared away, and by the time Mrs. Bird had made some strong coffee, Paddington was almost himself again. He was sitting up in the chair, helping himself to some dates, when they trooped back into the room. It took a lot to make Paddington ill for very long. When they had finished their coffee and were sitting round the blazing fire, feeling warm and comfortable, Mr. Brown rubbed his hands.
"Now, Paddington," he said, "it's not only Christmas, it's your birthday as well. What would you like to do?"
A mysterious expression came over Paddington's face.
"If you all go in the other room," he announced, "I have a special surprise for you."
"Oh, dear, must we, Paddington?" said Mrs. Brown. "There isn't fire."
"I shan't be long," said Paddington firmly. "But it's a special surprise, and it has to be prepared."
He held the door open, and the Browns, Mrs. Bird, and Mr. Gruber filed obediently into the other room.
"Now, close your eyes," said Paddington.
When they were all settled,
"and I'll let you know when I'm ready."
Mrs. Brown shivered. "I hope you won't be too long," she called out. But the only reply was the sound of the door clicking shut. They waited several minutes without speaking, and then Mr. Gruber cleared his throat.
"Do you think young Mr. Brown's forgotten all about us?" he asked.
"I don't know," said Mrs. Brown, "but I'm not waiting much longer." "Henry!" she exclaimed as she opened her eyes. "Have you gone to sleep?"
What's that?" snorted Mr. Brown.
He had eaten such a large dinner he was finding it difficult to keep awake.
What's happening? Have I missed anything?
Nothing's happening, said Mrs. Brown. Henry, you'd better go and see what Paddington's up to. Several more minutes went by before Mr. Brown returned to announce that he couldn't find Paddington anywhere. Well, he must be somewhere, said Mrs. Brown. Bears don't disappear into thin air. Crikey! Exclaimed Jonathan as a thought suddenly struck him. You don't think he's playing at Father Christmas, do you? He was asking all about it the other day when he put his list up on the chimney. I bet that's why he wanted us to come in here, because his chimney connects with the one upstairs, and there isn't a fire.
Father Christmas, said Mr. Brown. I'll give him Father Christmas.
He stuck his head up the chimney and called Paddington's name several times.
I can't see anything,
he said, striking a match. As if in answer, a large bump of soot descended and burst on top of his head. Now look what you've done, Henry, said Mrs. Brown, shouting so. You've disturbed the soot all over your clean shirt.
If it is young Mr. Brown, perhaps he's stuck somewhere, suggested Mr. Gruber. He did have a rather large dinner. I remember wondering at the time where he put it all.
Mr. Gruber's suggestion had an immediate effect on the party, and everyone began to look serious.
Why, he might suffocate with fumes.
When she returned, armed with a mop, everyone took it in turns to poke it up the chimney, but even though they strained their ears, they couldn't hear a sound. It was while the excitement was at its height that Paddington came into the room. He looked most surprised when he saw Mr. Brown with his head up the chimney. You can come into the dining room now, he announced, looking round the room. I've finished wrapping my presents, and they're all on the Christmas tree. You don't mean to say, spluttered Mr. Brown, as he sat in the fireplace rubbing his face with a handkerchief, you've been in there the whole time? Yes, said Paddington innocently. I hope I didn't keep you waiting too long. Mrs. Brown looked at her husband. I thought you said you looked everywhere, she exclaimed. Well, we'd just come from the dining room, said Mr. Brown, looking very sheepish. I didn't think he'd be there. Only goes to show, said Mrs. Bird hastily, as she caught the sight of the expression on Mr. Brown's face, how easy it is to give a bear a bad name. Paddington looked most interested when they explained to him what all the fuss was about. I never thought of coming down the chimney, he said, staring at the fireplace. Well, you're not thinking about it now, either, replied Mr. Brown sternly. But even Mr. Brown's expression changed as he followed Paddington into the dining room and saw the surprise that had been prepared for them. In addition to the presents that had already been placed on the tree, there were now 6 newly wrapped ones tied to the lower branches. If the Browns recognized the wrapping paper they had used for Paddington's presents earlier in the day, they were much too polite to say anything. I'm afraid I had to use old paper, said Paddington apologetically as he waved a paw at the tree. I hadn't any money left. That's why you had to go in the other room while I wrapped them. Really, Paddington, said Mrs. Brown, I'm very cross with you spending all your money on presents for us. I'm afraid they're rather ordinary, said Paddington as he settled back in the chair to watch the others. But I hope you like them. They're all labeled so that you know which is which.
ordinary!" exclaimed Mr. Brown as he opened his parcel. "I don't call a pipe rack ordinary, and there's an ounce of my favorite tobacco tied to the back as well."
"Gosh, a new stamp album!" cried Jonathan. "Whizzo! And it's got some stamps inside already." "They're Peruvian ones from Aunt Lucy's postcards," said Paddington. "I've been saving them for you." "And I've got a box of paints," exclaimed Judy. "Thank you very much, Paddington. It's just what I wanted." "We all seem to be lucky," said Mrs. Brown as she unwrapped a parcel containing a bottle of her favorite lavender water. "How did you guess? I finished my last bottle only a week ago." "I'm sorry about your parcel, Mrs. Bird," said Paddington, looking across the room. "I had a bit of a job with the knots."
"It must be something special," said Mr. Brown. "It seems all string and no parcel."
"Oh, that's because it's really clothesline," explained Paddington, "not string. I rescued it when I got stuck in the revolving doors at Crumbled and Ferns." "That makes 2 presents in one," said Mrs. Bird as she freed the last of the knots and began unwinding yards and yards of paper. "How exciting! I can't think what it can be." "Why," she exclaimed, "I do believe it's a brooch. And it's shaped like a bear. How lovely!" Mrs. Bird looked most touched as she handed the present round for everyone to see. "I shall keep it in a safe place," she added, "and only wear it on special occasions when I want to impress people."
"I don't know what mine is," said Mr. Gruber as they all turned toward him, squeezing the parcel. "It's such a funny shape." "It's a drinking mug," he exclaimed, his face lighting up with pleasure. "And it even has my name painted on the side."
"It's for your 11sies, Mr. Gruber," said Paddington. "I noticed how your old one was getting rather chipped."
"I'm sure it will make my cocoa taste better than it ever has." He stood up and cleared his throat. "I think I would like to offer a vote of thanks to young Mr. Brown," he said. "For all his nice presents, I'm sure he must have given them a great deal of thought." "Hear, hear!" echoed Mr. Brown as he filled his pipe. Mr. Gruber felt under his chair. "And while I think of it, Mr. Brown, I have a small present for you." Everyone stood round and watched while Paddington struggled with his parcel, eager to see what Mr. Gruber had brought him. A gasp of surprise went up as he tore the paper to one side, for it was a beautifully bound leather scrapbook, with Paddington Brown printed in gold leaf on the cover. Paddington didn't know what to say, but Mr. Gruber waved his thanks to one side. "I know how you enjoy writing about your adventures, Mr. Brown," he said. "And you have so many, I'm sure your present scrapbook must be almost full."
"It is," said Paddington earnestly, "and I'm sure I shall have lots more. Things happening to me, you know, but I shall only put my best ones in here." When he made his way up to bed later that evening, his mind was in such a whirl, and he was so full of good things, he could hardly climb the stairs, let alone think about anything. He wasn't quite sure which he had enjoyed most: the presents, the Christmas dinner, the games, or the tea, with the special marmalade layer birthday cake Mrs. Bird had made in his honor. Pausing on the corner halfway up, he decided he had enjoyed giving his own presents best of all. Paddington? Whatever have you got there?" He jumped and hastily hid his paw behind his back as he heard Mrs. Bird calling from the bottom of the stairs. "It's only some 5-pence pudding, Mrs. Bird," he called, looking over the banisters, guilty. "I thought I might get into hungry eating, and didn't want to take any chances." "Honestly," Mrs. Bird exclaimed, as she was joined by the others, "what does that bear look like? A paper hat about 10 sizes too big on his head, Mr. Gruber's scrapbook in one paw, and a plate of Christmas pudding in the other." "I don't care what he looks like," said Mrs. Brown, "so long as he stays that way. The place wouldn't be the same without him." But Paddington was too far away to hear what was being said. He was already sitting up in bed, busily writing in his scrapbook. First of all, there was a very important notice to go on the front page. It said, "Paddington Brown, 32 Windsor Gardens, London, England, Europe, the world." Then, on the next page, he added in large capital letters, "My Adventures, Chapter 1. Paddington sucked his pen thoughtfully for a moment and then carefully replaced the top on the bottle of ink before it had a chance to fall all over the sheets. He felt much too sleepy to write any more, but he didn't really mind. Tomorrow was another day, and he felt quite sure he would have some more adventures, even if he didn't know what they were going to be as yet. Paddington lay back and pulled the blankets up around his whiskers. It was warm and comfortable, and he sighed contentedly as he closed his eyes. It was nice being a bear, especially a bear called Paddington. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end. We'll be doing more Paddington over God knows how much time, because I actually have all of the Paddington books. I read them all when I was a kid. Well. Wow, it's 11:17. All right. Yeah. Well, thank you guys. I actually, in a box somewhere, I actually have a Paddington stuffed animal. I had, when I was little, I loved teddy bears. And I kept a few. One of them was a Paddington. I've got an older Winnie the Pooh. And then I have one of those big size made by the company called Gund. I have one of those. I had one of those. It is currently sitting on my youngest daughter's bed in Liverpool. She insisted on taking it with her. So, because whenever she needed a dad hug, she would hug the bear, and that would be just like it. Well, yeah, the gun bears are really cool. Oh, Teddy Ruxpin, like, I think it was my sister that had one. We would put, like, heavy metal cassette tapes in it and watch him sing stuff like Iron Maiden, which was incredibly hilarious. Yeah. We always joked that Teddy Ruxpin was going to come to life and, like, eat one of us. Oh, Tessa, that's just creepy. That's just, that is the, I'm going to take this out in the middle of the night and throw it in the dumpster, and then the next morning it's going to be sitting at the end of the bed. You tried to throw me away, Tessa? but I'm not that easy to get rid of. You're never getting rid of me. Why don't you come and sit with me? I'll tell you a story. That's okay. I know you didn't want to sleep tonight. I fully expect an angry DM tomorrow going, you kept me awake, damn it. Nightmares. It's just like, who wouldn't want to take like major, like, big, super scary movies and add a teddy bear? Can you imagine like a teddy bear instead of the little girl, in The Exorcist, it's a teddy bear. The head rotates around. Oh my goodness. All righty then. Well, oh, please do. I'm always up for, oh my God, Five Nights at Freddy's. I literally like hate that game. I cannot make it past the first night. It's like I step out of the room, I die. Like, what the hell? All right. Well, that's where we'll leave our story for tonight, with another collection of adventures from a bear who has a remarkable way of making life at number 32 Windsor Gardens anything but ordinary. Thank you all for spending a little time with me around the fire tonight. Join me on Wednesdays for 2 tales of cosmic terror. And then again next Sunday, and then Friday for some more tales, and then again next Sunday for something a little different, an evening of children's picture books. And if you enjoy these stories and would like to help support what I do here, please consider becoming a superfan or going to the UndeadPapa Mercantile. The link is in my bio. Every bit of support helps keep the campfire lit. I'm like 1 away from my superfan goal, so, hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Bet you somebody could take that spot. I'm kidding. Sort of. Anyway, until Wednesday, please be kind to each other. And be kind to yourself. Because kindness matters. And so do you. Good night, everybody. And good night over there to the 2 of you watching on the tubes. I greatly appreciate, and over the coming few months I will be expending more energy on the YouTube because TikTok is no longer my friend. All right, well, take care, and we'll see you on Wednesday.